I'm a lawyer. In my more than 20 years of practice, I have seen countless successful revenge cases, but the most impressive one was the story told to me by a client at a dinner party last year. My client's name is Arthur, the owner of an architectural design company. After Arthur won the lawsuit, he invited me to dinner. Also present was a retired police officer named Simon, who was back from Arizona to visit relatives. Arthur and Simon were the witnesses of this story. After a few drinks, he began to tell me this creepy story. That night, Arthur talked for a whole hour. The story was so fascinating that I didn't even take a sip of water for an hour. Even now, I still think that this story is absolutely as exciting as the Count of Monte Cristo. The only regret is that the final revenge was not as satisfying as in general cool novels. To be precise, the ending only allowed the truth, which had been awaited for more than 10 years, to surface. But even so, it was enough to comfort Arthur's soul. The story goes like this. Arthur is from Ohio. After graduating from college in 1998, he came to Denver to work for an architectural design firm. The salary was pretty good, but he was all alone and had no friends. In the summer of 2002, through a friend, Arthur met a girl named Vivian Miller. Vivian was from Georgia and worked as a waitress at a local restaurant. They fell in love at first sight and quickly fell in love. They rented a small apartment together in the suburbs and started planning their future. However, in September 2002, Vivian suddenly disappeared. Arthur was certain that Vivian was missing. Her phone calls were unanswered, and her text messages were not returned. Although he did not have the contact information of Vivian's family, all of Vivian's belongings were still in the apartment, and she even did not take her clothes. Obviously, this was not a planned departure. They had not been together long, and Arthur did not know much about her family. He could only go to the restaurant where Vivian worked to inquire about the situation. The restaurant manager told him that Vivian had not been to work for several days, and they could not reach her either. Helpless Arthur called the police. However, the police were reluctant to accept the case. They believed that Arthur and Vivian were not married, and Vivian was likely to have left Arthur. Arthur insisted that Vivian was missing and kept going to the police station to inquire about the progress of the case. Finally, with the help of a kind detective at the police station, the case was finally filed. The police went to the restaurant where Vivian worked to learn about the situation and contacted her hometown based on the information on her ID card. However, they found that Vivian did not go home. Her father had passed away a few years ago, her mother had remarried, and almost no one in her hometown was willing to care for her. Without any clues, the case was dismissed. Arthur was very unwilling. He felt that a girl who came to a foreign land to work alone, without relatives, and no reason, was already very pitiful. As her boyfriend, although he was not her legal guardian, he should at least fulfill his obligation to protect her safety. A person could not just disappear without a trace. No one should, let alone his girlfriend. But there was nothing he could do. Things took a turn for the better in 2007. By this time, Arthur had left the state-owned design institute and started a design studio with 2 friends. He also started to work with a class, the Design Institute in the mainland, to undertake some large-scale design projects. One day, Arthur had been working for 2 days and 2 nights to catch up on a big project. Just as he was about to go home to sleep, he suddenly received a call asking him to go to the police station immediately. On the phone, the police officer's tone was serious, but he did not tell him why. Arthur was a law-abiding citizen and believed that he had not done anything illegal or criminal, so he went to the police station calmly. As a result, as soon as he entered the police station, he was handcuffed by the police and thrown into the detention room. For a whole day and night, no one spoke to him, and he was detained alone. Just as Arthur was about to collapse, he met Officer Simon for the first time. When he said this, Officer Simon smiled a little embarrassedly and took over. When we interrogate a suspect in a major criminal case, we usually give him the cold shoulder first, and then launch a surprise attack. You were the most suspicious at that time, and we were counting on you to make a contribution. When you were inside, we were always studying how to deal with you. Arthur raised his glass to Officer Simon and said, "Officer Simon, it's okay for me to be wronged. I fully understand your work. If it weren't for your help, Vivian wouldn't have been able to clear her name. Speaking of this, I have to give you a toast." The two clinked glasses and drank it all. I was already deeply attracted by the story and just wanted Arthur to continue. Arthur continued. The first time Officer Simon interrogated me, he interrogated me for more than 20 hours in one go, and then gave me a criminal detention notice and asked me to sign it. At that time, I didn't know what happened, and Officer Simon didn't tell me the specific situation either. He just kept asking me some details about Vivian, such as how you met, how we got together, why I called the police, what I was specifically doing during the time Vivian disappeared, who could prove it, and so on. After all, several years had passed, and I couldn't remember many details. But I still tried my best to recall, and tried to speak clearly, because I could feel that something must have happened to Vivian, and it might not be a good thing. After I was criminally detained, I stayed in the detention center for more than a month. During this more than a month, Officer Simon and his colleagues visited my former colleagues at the Design Institute, the landlord and neighbors of my previous rented house, and many people who had interacted with me, trying every means to verify what I said. Fortunately, I worked at a state-owned design institute at that time. Fortunately, I was very busy at work and worked overtime almost every day. Unfortunately, our unit had relatively standardized administrative management and complete attendance records. What I stated was basically confirmed. After I was released, no one contacted me again, and I didn't know the progress of the case. It wasn't until a year later that I met Officer Simon again, and finally learned the ins and outs of the matter. However, the truth of the matter made my hair stand on end. For the first time, I felt that there were really demons in this world. After Arthur was released, he always wanted to know what had happened, but the case was still under investigation, and all the details were confidential, and he had no way of knowing. A year later, Arthur finally contacted Officer Simon through various connections, and they had dinner together at the arrangement of an intermediary. During the dinner, Officer Simon revealed some details of the case to Arthur. A few months ago, a corpse was dug up by an excavator while digging the foundation for a road construction project in the northern suburbs of the city. When the police arrived at the scene, after receiving the report, the scene had been destroyed by the excavator, and the body had been buried underground for too long, and there were very few clues that could be found. The police finally confirmed that the deceased was Vivian, the missing restaurant waitress, through the work hard on her body. This was a vicious murder case, and the police demanded that the case be solved as soon as possible. The Municipal Bureau quickly set up a special task force, headed by the director himself. Officer Simon, who was the deputy captain of the criminal police team at the time, served as the deputy head of the special task force. Since Arthur had reported Vivian missing and made a transcript, the police easily linked him to the case. In China, intentional homicide cases are most likely to be love killings, so Vivian's boyfriend naturally became the first suspect. It was also for this reason that Arthur was criminally detained by the police. While Arthur was in custody, Officer Simon conducted a lot of social relations investigations and finally confirmed that Arthur did not lie. It was not him who did it, so he was released. During the social relations investigation, Officer Simon listed a man named Benjamin Walker as a key suspect. Benjamin was a construction worker who came to Denver from out of town to work, and he rented a house opposite the house that Arthur and Vivian had rented. First of all, in the course of the investigation, the police found that Benjamin had a criminal record. He had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for robbery. Secondly, according to the feedback from the community staff at the time, Benjamin's landlord once said that Benjamin had paid half a year's rent at one time, but he moved out after only 2 months, and he left in a hurry, which was very abnormal. Say Chulurshka and Hafshuan, which was very abnormal. Based on these two clues, Officer Simon decided to arrest Benjamin. Finally, the police found him on a construction site in Nevada and arrested him. However, Benjamin was a tough nut to crack. He remained silent about the police's interrogation and refused to disclose any information. Although a conviction can be made without a confession, there was too little evidence in the case to determine that Benjamin was the murderer. The time of the crime was 2002. At that time, the city's SkyMate monitoring system was not yet perfect, and it was impossible to find any monitoring data. Moreover, because the body was dug out by an excavator, it had been damaged to a certain extent when it was discovered. Coupled with the long time that had passed, it was no longer possible to extract key evidence, such as DNA from the body. Therefore, unless Benjamin admitted it himself, the police would not be able to confirm that he was the murderer. Officer Simon was an experienced criminal policeman, and he had his own intuition. He had a hunch that Benjamin did it. But intuition is just intuition, after all, and it cannot be used as the basis for determining the facts of the case. The maximum period of criminal detention is 37 days. Before the expiry of the period, if the procuratorate does not agree to the arrest, the police must release the criminal suspect. In order to bring Benjamin to justice, Officer Simon went to the procuratorate many times to discuss the case, and finally the procuratorate reluctantly agreed to arrest him. However, due to insufficient evidence, the case was returned twice for supplementary investigation, but the police were still unable to pry Benjamin's mouth open. After tossing back and forth for more than half a year, the procuratorate finally made a decision not to prosecute, and the case had to be closed. Having said that, Officer Simon poured himself another glass of wine side and said, "I met Benjamin again later. It was the winter of the second year. I took the bus home after working overtime, and I ran into him again on the bus. He even had the audacity to say hello to me. I was furious at that time. I pointed at his nose and scolded him, saying that you killed someone, and the law may not be able to punish you, but won't your conscience hurt? Can you sleep at night?" He said that if you have the ability, let the court sentence me to death. Otherwise, don't talk to me about this nonsense. To be honest, I really wanted to beat him up at that time. Arthur raised his glass to Officer Simon and said, "Thanks to a just policeman like you, I was able to persevere in this matter." Arthur continued his story. At that time, after I heard this information, I couldn't sleep all night. To be honest, Vivian and I were only lovers for more than a month. I ran around for her disappearance and was even detained by the police for a month. It stands to reason that I have fulfilled my responsibility, but I am not reconciled. After all, it was a human life, a person no matter how small, how humble, should not disappear in this world for no reason. To die like this is too undignified. I really want to do something for Vivian, but I was really helpless at the time. I know who the murderer is, but he is still at large. What can I, an ordinary person, do? I can only wait for the opportunity, slowly. I believe that the law is inescapable, and I believe that one day Vivian's wronged soul will be able to wait for an explanation. Although her relatives may no longer need this explanation, I need it very much. This wait lasted 8 years. In 2016, Arthur had his own design firm. Driven by the country's policy of developing the Western region, construction was being carried out everywhere, and the architectural design industry ushered in a huge outlet. During this period, Arthur won a series of large-scale engineering designs, one after another. The annual turnover of his company also exceeded $100 million, and he himself became a well-known boss in the local area. However, during this period, Arthur never forgot about Vivian, and he had been paying attention to Benjamin's every move. Since being released from prosecution, Benjamin has not left Denver. He entered the construction industry as a construction worker that year, started his own business by contracting some small projects, and later became a contractor. In recent years, Benjamin has made a lot of money, bought a house and a car in Denver, and got married. Arthur believes that on his own, he may not be able to bring Benjamin to justice, but there are many ways to take revenge. In addition to the law, other methods can be used. He felt that he could start by attacking Benjamin economically, pressing him little by little, until he revealed his flaws. Over the past 8 years, Arthur has kept abreast of Benjamin's movements through various channels, and he has been waiting for a suitable opportunity. Finally, the opportunity came. Arthur is engaged in design and often comes into contact with the preliminary work of some large-scale investment projects. In his more than 10 years of work, Arthur has met all kinds of investors, and many of them are clever scammers. The routines of these scammers are similar. They usually start by packaging a company with a deep background. If conditions permit, it is best to be associated with state-owned enterprises, and then go to the local government for inspection. Make a beautiful feasibility study report, and file it with the Government Development and Reform Department. The investment amount of this type of project is usually ridiculously high, and it is embarrassing to take it out without a project of $40 to $50 billion. After the project is approved, these scammers start legal bidding. According to legal requirements, the project can only go through normal bidding procedures after the project is approved, the land transfer is completed, and the funds are in place. However, in order to lock in the construction rights, some engineering contractors are often willing to enter the site for construction in advance, and then go through the bidding procedures after the project procedures are completed. This provides scammers with an opportunity. As long as you are willing to start construction, I will sign a contract with you, but you must pay a deposit first, and the deposit is usually $25. For example, for a project of $100 million, you only need to pay a deposit of $5 million in advance to enter the construction site. In order to catch up with the construction period, local governments generally agree to the construction unit to enter the site for construction in advance, and then go through the relevant procedures after the land transfer procedures are completed. The end result of this scam is that the investors run away with the project margin. The government could not get back the land transfer fee and had to take back the land. The worst thing is the actual construction contractor. They not only lost the deposit but also could not get the project payment and eventually lost everything. Of course, To make the scam more realistic, scammers also need to invest some costs, such as early feasibility study reports, preliminary designs, construction drawings, etc. These things must be done, otherwise it will be impossible to sign a contract with the construction unit. Of course, they would not pay the design institute in full, but would only find some inexperienced design institutes, and they could get the drawings with a small deposit. Arthur is already a senior expert in the design industry. Of course, he cannot be fooled by these scams, and he is very familiar with the routines. At the end of 2016, an intermediary who was engaged in construction projects approached Arthur and asked him to help make a feasibility study report. The project was very large, with a total investment of more than $10 billion. Arthur knew it was a scam with just one glance, but he knew that the opportunity he had been waiting for had finally arrived. He told the middleman that he could first advance the funds to complete the preparation of the preliminary feasibility study report, and he could also make some construction drawings first. He could also pay the middleman's commission, but he had one condition, which was to talk directly to the project owner unit. So under the arrangement of the middleman, Arthur met the investor of the project. The investor spoke with a southern accent. The business card said he was the deputy general manager of a third-tier institution of a central enterprise. But according to Arthur's experience, he could tell at a glance that this so-called central enterprise was just an affiliated unit and had nothing to do with the project. The investor was full of style and repeatedly emphasized that he was not short of money, that many design institutes wanted to do his project, and that he would not have handed over the project to Arthur's company if it hadn't been for the middleman. In order to test Arthur's sincerity, he would not pay any fees in the early stage of the project, and Arthur needed to advance the funds to complete the feasibility study report and part of the construction drawings. Arthur had determined that the investor was a liar, and at this time he had already thought about his next plan. He told the investor that he could pay all the upfront costs, the design fee rate could also be lowered, and the middleman's commission would also be paid. But he had only one condition: the construction team that entered the site in the early stage of the project must be appointed by him. Of course, the construction team can advance the construction funds, and after receiving the project funds, they can pay the intermediary fees. The investor agreed to Arthur's conditions, and Arthur began to implement his plan intensively. He had only one goal, which was to dig a hole for Benjamin and bankrupt him. Arthur has a good brother named Johnny. Johnny is also a building contractor. In 2003, Johnny was doing construction on a project of a private enterprise. As a result, he encountered SARS. The project was suspended, the capital chain was broken, and he lost everything. A group of workers locked him at home to ask for an account, and the refrigerator and washing machine at home was smashed. Arthur was the designer of this project and knew Johnny. He knew that Johnny was a loyal and righteous man, so he took out almost all his savings to help Johnny through the difficulties. After that, Arthur often introduced some engineering projects to Johnny. The two sides cherished each other emotionally and supported each other in business. They were as close as brothers. Arthur knew that he could not complete the plan alone, so he found Johnny and revealed his plan. After Johnny listened, he agreed without thinking. With everything in place, Arthur met Benjamin again. The two made an appointment to meet at a coffee shop for a detailed discussion, and the middleman Henry was also there. Arthur said to Benjamin, "I didn't tell you about this project before because the project was not yet mature. We are all adults, and we must be reliable in doing things right. Now the project has been approved, and the construction drawings are also available. It's a part, you know, this project is designed, constructed, and tendered at the same time. If you agree, you can enter the venue now." The security deposit is 5. For the outside world. You are my own person, and I discussed it with Party A. Pay 3 and pay it directly to Party. As for the amount of work, you can see for yourself. The total investment is 11.7 billion US dollars. How much ability you have, I will strive for as much workload for you. We are all experts in this industry, and we have calculated the profit of this project. Based on the upper limit of the first-class charging standard, there is at least 30, and it can reach 35, if it is managed well. I know you won't do it yourself. You subcontract it out, charging 20 points of management fees. There are people who do second-hand contracting. After deducting the cost of qualification, affiliation, you can at least earn 17 million. In 100 million is 17 million. This project is a policy-based project. There is no problem with the funds, and the profit is sufficient. How much do you want to do? Give me an accurate number. Benjamin asked tentatively. Arthur, how much do you want to do? You can't let me make this money alone, right? Arthur said, I have 2 conditions. First, you can't treat the middleman, old Henry, badly. You two can discuss it yourself. Henry said, gratefully, it's okay. Arthur, Benjamin and I are our own people. We've already discussed it, including yours. Arthur said, you don't have to worry about mine, just take care of yourself. Second, I want to arrange my own team to go in and do 30 of your workload. My condition is to settle the project funds, first without paying a deposit. If you agree, I will arrange it for you. If you don't agree, I'll find someone else. Benjamin hesitated for a moment and said that he would go back and think about it. As a result, that night, Benjamin called Arthur and said that he could accept Arthur's conditions, but he requested that the total amount of engineering he could get should not be less than 300 million US dollars. After the 2 sides reached an agreement, Arthur took Benjamin to meet the investor of the project and signed an engineering construction contract. Theoretically, this contract should be signed with a qualified construction company, but since the project has not yet been put out to tender and Benjamin needs to enter the site for construction in advance, at Arthur's suggestion, the investor signed a personal contract with Benjamin in the name of the company, agreeing to re-sign a formal contract in the name of the winning bidder after the project bidding is completed. After Benjamin and the investor signed the contract, Arthur arranged for Johnny to be the host and invited Benjamin to dinner. During the dinner, in front of Johnny, Arthur said that he would subcontract about 30 million US dollars of the project within Benjamin's contract to Johnny's company. A month later, at the request of investors, the project officially started construction, and the construction of the 3 connections and 1 leveling was carried out first. The project undertaken by Johnny also included part of the 3 connections and 1 leveling project. After receiving Benjamin's notice, he organized a team to enter the site for construction. Arthur knew that the first step in his plan had been perfectly achieved. Next, the show is about to begin. Benjamin paid the project investor a performance bond of 9 million. He made a careful calculation in his mind. Although the 9 million had emptied all his savings, and he had borrowed some usurious loans, he believed that the money would come back soon. As long as the 3 connections and 1 leveling project of the project are completed, the following work will be opened. The new team will have to pay him a deposit when they enter the site. The ratio he set is 8. For a project of 200 million US dollars, he can receive a deposit of 16 million US dollars. After deducting the 9 million already paid, he still has a profit of at least 7 million US dollars. Before the project starts, he has already made a steady profit without losing money. The only thing that made him a little unhappy was that Arthur's friend, Johnny, didn't ask him to pay a deposit. If Johnny also paid a deposit, then his capital chain would be even more perfect. Benjamin also thought about just letting Johnny do the follow-up project, and after he received the security deposit first, he would subcontract the project to him. But Arthur flatly refused. "No way, I can only bear it first." For contractors like Benjamin, they don't do the actual construction themselves. Their usual practice is to directly subcontract after obtaining the project and earn the difference in subcontracting. At Arthur's recommendation, Benjamin also hired Jenny as the general manager of the project to help him manage other projects. After arranging all this, Benjamin took his mistress to vacation in the south. The first 2 months of the project went smoothly. It wasn't until the 3rd month that Benjamin, who was traveling abroad, suddenly received a call from an investor asking him to return to Denver immediately to deal with the matter. The investor did not make it clear on the phone what had happened, but just told him to come back quickly. He called Johnny but couldn't get through. He called Arthur again, but Arthur didn't answer either. Finally, he called the middleman Henry, and finally found out that something had happened on the construction site. More than 200 workers surrounded the construction site, holding banners demanding payment of their wages. At the same time, Benjamin also discovered something that puzzled him. His WeChat Alipay bank cards, including credit cards, were all frozen. He was now penniless. Finally, at the urging of the investor, he still bought a plane ticket through his mistress and finally returned to Denver. Before he could contact the investor, he received a property preservation ruling from the court. Johnny's company, as the actual constructor, sued Benjamin for arrears of workers' wages, losses of idling workers, project funds, and related interest, totaling $15 million, and applied to the court to seize all of Benjamin's property, including 2 houses, 3 cars, bank accounts, and all his stocks in the stock market. In other words, all of Benjamin's assets have now been seized by the court, including some of the funds he prepared for this project and the usurious loans he borrowed. What made his headache even more was that out of the $9 million deposit he paid to the investor, $5 million was from usury. Now the construction site has been shut down, and the investor has made it clear to him that if construction cannot be resumed as soon as possible, he will not give him a penny of the subsequent project funds. Benjamin also thought about simply changing a construction unit to take over the project, but Johnny organized more than 200 migrant workers to block the construction site, making it clear that if the migrant workers' wages were not paid, no one would be allowed to start work. And Johnny himself refused to meet with Benjamin, only made it clear on the phone that he did not recognize the previous oral agreement between the 2 parties for advance payment for construction, and that the project payment should be settled once a month according to the rules, and $15 million were indispensable. If you have money, you can talk, but if you don't have money, see you in court. The court hearing is a long way off, and the unsealing can only be done after the trial and the court's judgment. The entire construction site will take at least half a year. Benjamin has been driven to a dead end. During this period of time, Arthur has been in contact with Benjamin. He told Benjamin that he only recommended Johnny to do this project because he was entrusted by others, and he and Johnny were not familiar with each other. At the same time, Arthur also said that he sympathized with Benjamin's experience and was willing to do his best to help him solve the problem, but he was on a business trip abroad and would not be back until about 10 days later. During this time, Benjamin needed to stand up first by himself. Actually, Arthur was in Denver at the time, and he had been working with Johnny to figure out the next step. Arthur felt that the heat was not enough, and he had to add another fire. So Johnny organized 2 groups of migrant workers, about 20 or so people, to surround Benjamin's house and smash the TV at home. Benjamin called the police at that time. After the police came, they found out that it was an economic dispute, so they criticized and educated the workers at the scene. After the police left, 4 or 5 of Johnny's workers remained, guarding Benjamin's house and preventing him from going out. After a week, the loan sharks who lent money to Benjamin also came to their door. 7 or 8 social idlers moved directly into Benjamin's house and lived with him. Wherever Benjamin went, these people followed. Benjamin proposed to mortgage his Mercedes Benz to Ben, first to repay the interest, but these people disagreed. They also knew that Benjamin's car had been seized by the court, and they couldn't get it. Just as Benjamin was about to collapse, Arthur's call came. Arthur inquired in detail about the incident on the phone, and then said, "Wait for me at home. I'll be right there." When Arthur arrived at Benjamin's house, his house had been messed up by these people. His wife had taken the children back to her parents' home, and there were a room full of big men sitting in the house, all with tattoos on their bodies. The TV had been smashed to pieces. The refrigerator had also been smashed. The coffee table was broken into several pieces. There was a pool of urine on the sofa, and there was a stench in the room. Without saying a word, Arthur took out 20,000 and handed it to the leader. He said, "This little money is just for brothers to drink tea. You go back first, and I will say hello to your boss. Please give us a few days, and I will help Benjamin find a solution. Don't worry, the money will be fine. As soon as the project resumes work, and the project payment arrives, I will return the money immediately." After these people got the money, they stopped. Before leaving, they threatened that if they didn't see the money within a week, they would not be as polite as they were today. After sending the loan sharks away, Arthur took Benjamin out to dinner and invited Henry the middleman. While eating, Arthur explained to Benjamin that he was also kind, and the leader asked him to arrange a team, and he had to do it. But he didn't expect Johnny to extort and blackmail. Arthur also said that he had reported the matter to the leader, and the leader promised to help coordinate and resolve it. Benjamin asked, "Which leader is it? Can you tell me?" Arthur said, "You have to understand the rules." Speaking of this, it was not easy for Benjamin to ask any more questions. However, Benjamin still expressed his gratitude to Arthur. He said that he doesn't usually drink, but he still picked up his glass and drank a glass with Arthur and Henry. The 3 of them scolded Johnny and cursed Johnny for not dying. Arthur said, "You can't count on me for everything. You have to find a way to save yourself." Benjamin said, "To be honest, I'm at the end of my rope. Now, the only way is to transfer the project. I have found a leader and asked him to introduce me to a powerful construction unit. They also expressed their willingness to take over this project. We had a brief talk, and they were willing to pay me the security deposit and migrant workers' wages that I owed first, and then give me another $2 million. I transferred the project to them, and they would take care of the rest." Arthur knew that Benjamin was not lying to him. At that time, it was the craziest time for engineering projects. There were many well-funded contractors who dared to take any risks for a project. The method Benjamin mentioned is currently the most likely solution. But how could Arthur let his plan fail like this? It seems it's time to take the most important step. Arthur planned for several years, a well-designed trap. How could he let Benjamin escape so easily? Arthur had expected Benjamin's reaction. Once Benjamin wants to get out, he must act immediately. He wanted to completely blow up the project and make Benjamin never recover. That night, several whistleblower letters that had been prepared long ago were sent to various functional departments of the government. The content was about the investor of the project who fabricated the background of the central enterprise, defrauded the project to be approved, and defrauded the project's security deposit. At the same time, a large number of posts exposing the background of the project investors appeared on the internet. Due to the conclusive evidence and explosive content, it was quickly reported by the media. Subsequently, representatives of more than 200 migrant workers went to the municipal government to petition, accusing the project investors of fabricating facts and defrauding the project to be approved, resulting in arrears of wages for migrant workers and heavy losses. Just when the relevant government departments discovered the problem and were preparing to investigate the project, they found that the investor of the project, the senior liar with a southern accent, had already flown from Los Angeles to Australia a few days ago. After investigation by the police, in this project alone, the investor defrauded more than $20 million in project security deposits, plus other projects. The amount involved exceeded $150 million. Benjamin was blocked at home again by angry migrant workers and loan sharks. The contractor who was originally going to take over the project also decisively terminated the negotiation after hearing the news. The project has exploded. Only a fool would take over. Benjamin called Arthur again, almost begging Arthur to help him find a solution. Arthur did not refuse either. He took $100,000 in cash and came to Benjamin's house, of which $50,000 was returned to the usury, and the other $50,000 was given to the migrant workers to appease the group. Benjamin was grateful to Arthur and offered to write Arthur an IO. Arthur said, "No, everyone has difficulties. I believe that with Benjamin's ability and connections, he will definitely be able to make a comeback in the future." Arthur bought 2 more bottles of Motai, invited Henry, and the 3 of them had dinner together. He asked Benjamin to drink more, and he would be relieved after being drunk. When he woke up tomorrow, it would be a new day. Arthur knew that Benjamin liked to drink, but every time he ate, he would say that he didn't drink and would only drink 1 drink at most. Today, Benjamin was forced to do this, and it was Arthur who helped him out with cash. In addition, what Arthur brought was good wine, so he stopped insisting and drank with Arthur. Benjamin's drinking capacity is actually not bad, but he has a bad habit. Whenever he drinks too much, he likes to talk nonsense. 2 bottles of Moody Benjamin drank nearly a bottle by himself. When the wine was almost finished, Arthur ordered another bottle of Moody, filled it up for Benjamin, and said indignantly, "I was a bloody man back then. If you let me bump into a scumbag like Johnny, I would definitely hack him to death with a knife. Do you believe it?" Henry was also drunk, looked at Arthur and said, "How can it be so easy to kill? Do you dare to kill?" Benjamin was already drunk and said vaguely, "Murder. It's not difficult at all, but killing Johnny can't solve the problem. If it can solve the problem, I would have killed him long ago." Arthur was immediately alert. Henry might think that Benjamin was talking drunk, but Arthur was keenly aware that this was Benjamin's relaxation of his psychological defenses under the influence of alcohol. This may be the only opportunity he has waited for, after doing so much and waiting for so many years. Arthur's heart began to race, but he still forced himself to calm down. He thought carefully for a moment, and then asked, tentatively, "Don't burn, just your guts. A few migrant workers blocked you at home. I'm afraid to go out. If you really dare to kill, I will dare to pay you back the usury. Do you believe it?" Benjamin slammed the table and said angrily, "I don't dare." "Why don't I dare? Do you know what it feels like to have a knife stuck in your body? It's like, well, piercing a water bag, puffing it in, and then the person being stabbed loses his strength very quickly, no matter how big he is or how strong his body is. As long as he gets stabbed, he won't be able to move. It's completely different from what's shown on TV. Arthur's eyes widened in excitement. He had a hunch that Benjamin must have killed more than one person. Vivian had no stab wounds on her body, so where did his immersive killing experience come from? Arthur continued to ask, "Don't brag, as if you really killed someone. Just her guts." Benjamin stared straight at Arthur, and after a while he said, 3 years ago, on the construction site of Emerald Lake, I was also blackmailed." At this point, Benjamin suddenly seemed to wake up. He immediately stopped talking, rubbed his face with his hands and said, "Hey, I drank too much. I won't drink anymore. Go home to sleep." Arthur offered to help Benjamin open a room nearby, but Benjamin refused. When Arthur went back after paying the bill, he found that both Benjamin and Henry were gone. Arthur called Henry, and Henry said that Benjamin drank too much, and he wanted to take Benjamin home. Since Benjamin said that Arthur's hands had been shaking, he was almost certain that Benjamin had killed other people. The key words were 3 years ago, an Emerald Lake construction site. He couldn't do this kind of thing by himself. He could only pin his hopes on the police. So after 8 years, Arthur called Officer Simon again. Officer Simon had already retired to the second line and was preparing to apply for retirement. Over the years, he has never forgotten Vivian's case. He failed to bring the murderer to justice and even let the murderer pass by. This has become the biggest regret in his heart. At the dinner, Officer Simon said, "I have handled hundreds of criminal cases in my life, and there are many cases that have not been solved, and I have seen many heinous murderers, but I clearly know who killed the people. But there is nothing I can do about it. There is only this one case. This case is like a thorn in my heart, making me toss and turn in countless nights, unable to sleep. I am engaged in criminal investigation, and I also understand criminal psychology. If a person kills someone, but is not punished, then in the rest of his life, murder will become an option for him to solve the problem. That is to say, it is very likely that he will kill again. We let go of a demon, which is tantamount to pushing more innocent people into hell. This is what makes me most unwilling." After Officer Simon received Arthur's call, he did not hesitate to submit an application for delayed retirement to the Municipal Bureau and requested the Municipal Bureau to reopen the investigation into Vivian's case. Under the instructions of the leaders of the Municipal Bureau, a special case team was quickly set up with Officer Simon as the team leader, focusing on investigating the 2 keywords of 3 years ago and the Emerald Lake construction site. During the dinner that night, Arthur secretly recorded the sound, and he handed over all the recording materials to Officer Simon as clues to the case. Emerald Lake is located in California, which belongs to a cross-state case and takes some time. But Arthur was disturbed to find that Benjamin's phone could not be reached. The drinking that night made Benjamin feel a little uneasy, and he seemed to want to escape. Arthur immediately reported the situation. Officer Simon made a decisive decision and decided to arrest Benjamin immediately. But the reason for the arrest cannot be intentional homicide, so Arthur asked Johnny to report the case to the public security organ on the grounds of maliciously defaulting on wages of migrant workers. The reporting materials were written by a lawyer overnight, and more than 200 migrant workers put their fingerprints on them. The police attached great importance to the case, quickly filed a case for investigation, and took compulsory measures against Benjamin. When the police arrested Benjamin, Arthur was at the scene. At that time, Benjamin was being held in a hotel by loan sharks and was beaten. With nowhere to go, Benjamin called Arthur again, working to borrow another $100,000. Arthur contacted the police in the name of sending money and cooperated with the police to arrest Benjamin. Several loan sharks who controlled Benjamin were also taken away by the police on suspicion of illegal detention. Things went relatively smoothly next. The police who went to Emerald Lake in California to investigate came back soon, bringing with them relevant evidence. 3 years ago, the total of 3 murders occurred at Emerald Lake, 2 of which have been solved, and 1 has not been solved. In the unsolved case, the victim was named David Johnson, the owner of a local sand and gravel plant. The body was found in the woods by the lake with a knife in his abdomen. After DNA comparison, the police confirmed that Benjamin's DNA was completely consistent with the DNA extracted from the scene. At the same time, the police also found David Johnson's missing bank card in Benjamin's home. There are also some very professional detection processes, which Arthur can't tell, and Officer Simon is not willing to disclose. In short, in this murder case, the police have mastered sufficient evidence to bring Benjamin to justice. It turned out that when Benjamin was working on a project at Emerald Lake, the owner of the sand and gravel factory named David had been supplying him with sand and gravel, but Benjamin had been in arrears with the payment, causing problems with David's capital turnover. In addition, David is a local and has some power in the local area. He has repeatedly led people to the construction site to ask Benjamin for accounts, and even threatened Benjamin. Later, Benjamin took the risk, ambushed David on his way home, stabbed him to death, and dumped his body in the woods by the lake. Intentional homicide and dumping of corpses are particularly bad circumstances. It is almost a certainty that Benjamin will be sentenced to death. But for Vivian's case, Benjamin always refused to confess. Officer Simon said, "Don't worry, this guy will die if he kills 1 person, and he will die if he kills 2 people. Why did he only admit to 1? He just wants to delay time. After the death penalty review procedure starts, if other crimes are found, the procuratorate will ask the court to stop the execution of the death penalty, and he will be able to live for a few more days." Benjamin's case took 7 months from investigation to prosecution. In the end, the Denver Intermediate People's Court sentenced Benjamin to death and deprived him of his political rights for life. Benjamin refused to accept and appealed. During the second instance, Benjamin spent a lot of money to hire the best lawyer, but he still failed to change the verdict. The Colorado High Court finally rejected the appeal and upheld the original verdict. According to the procedure, Benjamin's case entered the death penalty review procedure, and the federal Supreme Court made a final ruling on whether Benjamin should be sentenced to death. It has been a year and a half since the Supreme Court's death penalty review decision came down. After receiving the death penalty approval ruling, Benjamin contacted Officer Simon through the procurator's mailbox in the detention center, saying that he had important information to report. Everything was as Officer Simon expected. The next thing was told by Officer Simon. Officer Simon looked serious and stood up as he recounted this. The 3 of us stood up silently, raised our glasses ready to drink it all after Officer Simon finished speaking. When I saw Benjamin in the detention center, he was completely broken, like a walking corpse, slumped on the ground. I know he was afraid. He was afraid of death. People are afraid of death, but if you know exactly when you're going to die, the torment of fear can be excruciating. He asked me, after confessing, could he live a few more days? I told him, "You are dead. Stop having any illusions. Whether you say it or not will not affect the execution of the death penalty. You say it. It's just a process. It can make you live a few more days. Just." Benjamin was silent for a long time. Finally, as if he had made up his mind, he let out a long sigh and confessed to me the crime of killing Vivian. He wants to rape Vivian, but Vivian would rather die than obey, and desperately resisted. In a hurry, he pinched Vivian's neck, just wanting her not to yell, but Vivian was strangled to death by him. He used a van from the construction site to take Vivian's body to a wilderness in the suburbs, dug a hole, and buried the body. After doing all this, he was very scared and couldn't sleep every night. When the police found him, he told himself that he must not admit it. Once he admitted it, there would be only one dead end. In this way, he actually escaped legal sanctions. Since then, he has discovered that killing has become an option for him to solve problems. After killing Vivian, he planned to solve the problem by killing people many times, but he failed to do so due to various reasons. It was not until 3 years ago that he killed the owner of the sand and gravel factory in Emerald Lake. He lived in fear. He was always worried about being exposed. He used to like to drink, but since he killed Vivian, he didn't dare to drink in front of outsiders. Only when he was alone at home, or secretly drank a little. He couldn't sleep well every night, and he wanted to know if he would go to hell after he died. A month later, Benjamin was executed by lethal injection. Arthur originally wanted to go to the scene. He said that he would pay any amount of money, but according to the regulations, he was not allowed to attend the hearing. Arthur regretted this. When Officer Simon said this, he let out a long sigh and said, "I looked into Benjamin's eyes at the time, and there was only one feeling in my heart. Hell is empty, and the devil is on earth." Arthur also sighed and said, "Good and evil will be rewarded in the end. I am very pleased, and I am worthy of Vivian." He seemed to have remembered something, and said with some guilt, "I can't remember what Vivian looks like. I can't remember it. I can't remember it." That's the end of the story. Frankly speaking, this is not a revenge story full of refreshing points, and it can't even be called a successful revenge story. But I don't know why. I just want to tell it. Life is full of frustrations. Maybe what really touched me was Arthur's persistence. May the living be kind. May the deceased rest in peace.